All right. Back here, kradio.org. We're gonna just jump right back into this thing because I forget what I was saying, but we're back here. So let's see what's going on. I believe they're about to give Steyer's fucking raisin in his hand. Let's see what happens here.
No, I want to turn to America's role in the world and readiness to be commander-in-chief on day one. Just this week, you saw it during the State of the Union. President Trump offered an indication of what he'll tout on the campaign trail. He celebrated the U.S. airstrike that killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, saying Soleimani was the Iranian regime's most ruthless butcher, a monster who murdered or wounded thousands of American service members in Iraq. Mayor Buttigieg, you're the only veteran standing on this stage, and while there's still debate about whether or not there was an imminent threat, there is no debate about whether or not Soleimani was a bad actor who was responsible for the deaths of many Americans. Given what you know about Soleimani, if your national security team came to you with an
in your 2 months of military experience, but yeah, go on.
Opportunity to strike, would Soleimani have been dead or would he still be alive under your presidency?
In the situation that we saw with President Trump's decision, there is no evidence that that made our country safer. Look, I feel very strongly about the campaign of murder and mayhem that General Soleimani and his units have perpetrated. It's also the case that if we learned nothing else from the war in Iraq, it's that taking out a bad guy is not a good idea if you do not know what you were doing. This president has moved us this much closer to the brink of war, but it didn't start with the Soleimani strike. It started with withdrawing us from the Iran nuclear deal that his own administration certified was working. And it's time for us to recognize that every time a step is taken that moves us to the brink of war, that has incredibly serious consequences for those who serve. By chance, just because I was traveling for the campaign, not long ago I ran into somebody that I hadn't seen since we were both serving, hadn't seen since she was injured in an insider attack. And I saw her coming down the concourse in the airport wearing a Wounded Warrior Project t-shirt that said, "Some assembly required." And when I asked her how she was doing, she lifted up her knee and tapped on the part of her leg that they couldn't save, tapped on the prosthetic, and said the Navy had fixed her up just fine. And then let me know that she was looking forward to an upcoming deployment. People in our uniform will do whatever the United States requires of them. What they deserve in return is a president who will actually read the intelligence, pay attention to the international security situation, consult with our allies, keep U.S. politics out of it, and never commit our troops to a situation where they would have to go into harm's way if there is an alternative.
Yeah, so, okay, this makes me think about something kind of interesting. All right, some of the conflicts that arise with these different types of, political viewpoints, but, what if it's possible that giving people free access, tuition-free universities and whatnot, it's possible that could majorly fucking disrupt the military-industrial complex, because that's a lot of the way that they entice people into the internet or into the military, is by giving them things like free tuition, free education, and stuff like that. So it's very possible that that's something that conflicts a lot with some of the stuff that we have going on right now. And they're just it's really interesting because that gets to the roots of why they have a problem with certain things.
Yeah. I think this was a good question, and I think it was actually a pretty good response by Pete. I think the only thing I would add to his response is he's talking about, I get that he was in the military, so he has a very military perspective of it, and how he's saying the troops deserve a commander-in-chief who won't leave them in danger. But I think he should also hit on the fact that the American public deserves a commander-in-chief who isn't going to make uninformed decisions.
Right. I'm one of the probably millions of young men right now who are eligible for the draft, so it's it very quickly becomes a not so fucking funny type scenario.
Yeah, and even if you don't think it's going to lead to World War III, even if right. You think that's just a funny joke, there are valid reasons to think that war is not fun, war is not good. looking towards the wars we've had in the Middle East already, like, right, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, we haven't seen terrorism get better. If anything, we've seen it get worse. We haven't seen the way that the world perceives the U.S. to get better, right? I think Pete dedicated his response to talking about how the military and military families deserve better. But I think as a country, we deserve better. We deserve to have a president who isn't going to take us to wars in the Middle East at all, because they're a waste of time. They're a waste of taxpayer money. They're a waste. They damage our reception with the rest of the world. And I think just in general, he wasted an opportunity. Pete has wasted an opportunity to really hit on why war is bad. Obviously war sucks, people die, but why specifically these kind of Middle Eastern wars are such a waste of U.S. investment.
And what's really incredible is, obviously, he's a fucking veteran. So, you know what Tulsi would say is, oh, me and my brothers and sisters out there on the battlefield, I would hate to see any more of them lose their lives, countless lives, to horrible regime change wars. You know, there's none of that kind of rhetoric going on with him. Yeah, so it's because
he's secretly a robot.
It's because secretly he joined the military to advance his political career. He thought it would look really nice, which, you know, he's just he's the fucking McKinsey. I went to fucking this and that university, and I was a troop, and I'm gay. And how many more boxes do you want me to check as a candidate before you'll fucking love me and buy my t-shirts? Sorry, dude.
Not buying what you're selling.
Not buying it. I wasn't born yesterday, as they say.
Mayor Buttigieg, let me just press further on this, though.
Mayor Booty Care.
President Trump has signaled in a general election campaign he will celebrate his willingness to order that strike. I'm asking, if your national security team came to you and presented you with the opportunity, would you take the strike?
It depends on the circumstances. It depends if there was an alternative, and it depends what the different effects would be. That's my point. This is not an episode of 24. This is a situation that requires that you actually evaluate the entire intelligence picture. This president has insulted the intelligence community, but they put their lives on the line to gather the information that will help a decision maker evaluate whether or not something like that is justified. And I don't think he even reads it. And here we have a situation where the world, one of the most volatile places in the world, has just become more dangerous at the hands of a president who has no regard for the military. Not only punishing a war hero today with what he did to Colonel Vindman, but pardoning war criminals in a way that undermines the entire sense of good order and discipline and military honor. We deserve a better commander-in-chief.
Mayor Buttigieg, thank you.
Jump at me good.
I do want to take this to Vice President Biden next, because we know that the Obama administration was aware of the threat that Soleimani posed. So was the Bush administration before it. I'm asking tonight, as Commander-in-Chief, though, would you have ordered the strike?
No, and the reason I wouldn't have ordered the strike, there's no evidence yet of imminent threat that was going to come from him. Look what happened. His America First policy has made America alone. You cannot think of a time, David, and as long as you've been alive, when NATO has said to the United States of America and to Iran, made a moral equivalence, said, both of you stand down. We are alone now, alone in that region of the world, without friends, without support, without allies. And secondly, you saw what happened when that air raid, when those missiles were fired from Iran into Iraq at Al-Assad Air Base. 64 of our heroes were wounded. I don't know what I would have done if my son were still there. I would have been so damn angry, I don't know what I would have done. But here's what...
Unless he was making...
Joe Biden feels emotion. Hold up. This is weird.
Oh, boy. I wonder, now that we're stopped, I wonder if anybody is going to... Oh, I'll let him.
What happened? They received traumatic brain injury. What did the president say? He said, headaches. Not bad. Headaches. That's all they are. This guy doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief for one more day.
So, okay, here we go.
We get it. Trump is bad.
We got Bernie raising his hand. Hopefully he comes on here and says, I'm hoping what he says is that this whole General Soleimani thing has a high correlation rate to the fucking impeachment trial. The guy was going into impeachment in the Senate The Democrats have been holding, Nancy Pelosi have been holding the impeachment articles, and he is looking for political ammo. So what does he need to do to appease the Republicans? He goes and does some kind of military strike. I don't fucking know, man, but it looks sus. And I really hope that somebody can come out and be like, connect some dots between some of these issues where they don't really do a good job of connecting them dots.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Senator Sanders, you have called this assassinating a government official. Yeah. You would not have ordered the strike.
Right. Look, here is the danger, David. There are very bad leaders all over the world. Kim Jong-un in North Korea is probably responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of his people, threatening all of Asia with nuclear weapons. You got Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, who is a terrible murderer, who murdered Khashoggi in cold blood and dismembered his body. You have Putin in Russia, who has been involved in political assassinations of his enemies. You got Xi in China, who's put 1 million Muslims into concentration camps. You cannot go around saying, you're a bad guy, we're going to assassinate you. And then you're going to have, if that happens, you're opening the door to international anarchy. That every government in the world will then be subjected to attacks and assassination. What we have got to do, which Trump does not understand, is strengthen the State Department and our diplomatic capabilities, not just the military. What we have got to do is bring countries around the world together with our power and our wealth and say, you know what, let us sit down and work out our differences through debate and discussion at the UN, not through more and more war and the expenditures of trillions of dollars and the loss of God knows how many lives.
Senator Sanders, thank you. This does.
All right. So at this point in the debate, guys, we're about a little bit more than, looks like halfway done, and underwhelming so far. So we're just I'm gonna keep going, and if there needs to be any commentary, we'll get back into it. But I'm really hoping that they're gonna kind of start getting into some better topics, but we'll see.
Take me to Afghanistan and to America's longest war. And Senator Warren, you recently said, quote, we have one general after another in Afghanistan who comes in and says, we've just turned the corner. And then what happens? It's all the same. Someone new comes in and says, we've just turned the corner. You said so many say it, we're going in circles. We were on the ground in Afghanistan and in Iraq in recent months, and the generals told us that the U.S. needs some U.S. presence on the ground, U.S. Special Forces, some presence to go after ISIS and the terrorists. If you're commander-in-chief, would you listen to the generals, or do they fall into the category of the generals you mentioned before?
No, look, I sit on Senate Armed Services Committee, so I get to the briefings from the generals on a regular basis. I've been to Afghanistan, to Iraq, I've been to Jordan, I've been throughout the region. I've been there with John McCain, I've been there with Lindsey Graham, to ask the hard questions about what's happening, to ask our generals, to ask their generals, to ask people who are on the ground. And the bottom line is nobody sees a solution to this war. Nobody can describe what winning looks like. All they can describe is endless war. And I realize there are people on this debate stage who are willing to say, yeah, we'll leave our troops there for 5 more years, for 10 more years. Lindsey Graham has said he's willing to leave troops for 100 more years. And yet, what has all these years of war brought us? Right now, the Afghan government controls less than 60% of the land. People don't have faith in it. It's a corrupt government. The opium trade is higher than ever. Look, we sent our troops in, and they did their best. They were there for us, but we need to be there for them, and that means not send our troops to do work that cannot be solved militarily. It is time to bring our combat troops home. It is time to stop this endless war in Afghanistan.
So, Senator Warren, I want to press you on this. You just said combat troops.
Yes.
So if the generals came to you and said we need U.S. Special Forces, some footprint in Iraq and Afghanistan, would you listen? Would you leave them?
So I want to hear the plan. Not just a, we need it now, we need it for the next day, we need it for the 6 months. And I want to know where our allies are. We all have an interest in dealing with terrorism and controlling terrorism, but that means it can't just be the United States waging endless war. That does not make us safer. It does not make the region safer. It does not make the world safer. We should work with our allies in managing terrorism, but we need to end this war in Afghanistan. We cannot wait 5 more years or 10 more years or until we turn the corner 10 more times. We need to bring our combat troops home.
Senator Warren, thank you. I want to take this to the Vice President, because you have said of Senator Warren's comments before that the United States should get out of the Middle East. You have said, I quite frankly was surprised that I have never heard anyone say with any serious background in foreign policy that we should pull all troops out of the Middle East. Is Senator Warren wrong on this?
I'm not sure what she wants to pull all troops out of the Middle East. But if she does want to put all troops out of the Middle East, we saw what happens when that happened. I helped put together a 61-nation group to take out ISIS by putting fewer than 5,000 forces along the Turkish border to see to it that they lost 10,000, the Kurds lost 10,000 lives. They defeated ISIS. They ended the caliphate. And then the president, on a whim, dealing with a man I know very well, the guy running Turkey, who's more of an autocrat now than a Democrat. And what happened? We pulled out, and you saw what happened. You saw the end of the effort to be able to continue to contain ISIS, number one. Number two, close your eyes, everybody. Remember what you saw on television. You saw a woman standing up there holding up her baby, Kurds saying, please don't leave us. And our military women and men going out in their up-armor Humvees with their heads down, ashamed of what they did. It didn't take a lot of men and women to do what needed to be done. And with regard to Afghanistan, it's now I can say it because it's made public. I was totally against the whole notion of no nation building in Afghanistan. The only thing we should be doing is dealing with terrorism in that region. And the fact that I've been in every part of Afghanistan, not in combat like my friend has, but in a helicopter and or on a vehicle. In every part of it, as Senator and Vice President. Here's what I saw. There's no possibility of uniting that country, no possibility at all making it a whole country. But it is possible to see to it that you're not able to launch more attacks from the region on the United States of America. That's a small footprint that we needed. I argued for that in the beginning.
You mentioned Mayor Buttigieg, and I do want to take this to you next, Mayor. Given your finish in Iowa, you've come under increasing scrutiny, attacks from opponents on experience. We've heard that theme even right here tonight. You have said on the Iraq War, for example, I just don't believe there is any justification for that vote. You said it's the difference between tenure and judgment, that it's the judgment that matters, not the time in Washington. Vice President Biden, as you know, voted yes. As Commander-in-Chief, do you believe your judgment would be better than the Vice President's?
I believe that I have the judgment to help us get through these situations where obviously the Vice President made the wrong decision when it came to such an important moment in our foreign policy. And looking forward, we got to recognize just how much is going to be on the plate of the next president.
I'm bored. I want to go through this fucking stupid segment on war because they're all warmongers and we know it. And they're not turning to the one person. They're not turning to the one person that's going to say anything about bullshit war. So this is fucking snooze fest.
Well, and what Joe Biden said was interesting to me, just because he was saying that there's no hope for us to fix Afghanistan. I think just in general, having the perspective that there's no hope for us to do anything, so we just have to keep doing what we're doing. Okay, well, what we're doing right now isn't working. I guess just he's saying that what we're doing right now is the best possible solution because there's no way to fix Afghanistan. But the thing is, what we're doing right now isn't working, so we need to try something else to fix Afghanistan. It's not impossible, and it's not even necessarily fully our responsibility. There's so many factors that go into it, but I think that there's so much anti-U.S. sentiment in the Middle East and in Afghanistan because of what we've done there, and it's a waste of taxpayer money and it's a waste of time. So simply saying, well, since the status quo is the best thing that we can do in this shitty situation, let's just keep doing that. It's very ill-reflective on the way he thinks as a candidate. as a candidate. He's like, well, if what's working is like getting us through, then we'll do it. And like, yeah, you want to know what's getting us through? Our current healthcare system. You know what's not ideal? Our current healthcare system. Like, I don't want a candidate who says this is good enough. I want a candidate who says let's do better.
That is different in kind from what we have faced before. It's not just about dealing with the aftermath of the war in Iraq, it's about preventing a war with Iran. And not only do we have to undertake the military and counterterrorism activities that we've been doing throughout, the next president is going to have to restore the credibility of this country among our allies and among the international community. At a moment when we are facing fundamentally different challenges, from asymmetric warfare to cybersecurity threats. President Trump's imagination of a national security strategy is a big wall and a moat full of alligators. It's a 17th century approach to keeping a place safe. What we have to do is be ready for the future.
Minimizing Trump and anything that he does. Oh yes, Trump, the guy who has no policies. Okay, well, people who support Trump don't like having an open border. That's a valid thing that people can believe in, right? Like, we have a welfare state. Open borders technically aren't sustainable. Like, that's facts. And I'm not going to pretend it's not. Going out there and minimizing Trump's platform. Yes, the man says build a wall. Yes, he says that. But, like, he has taken genuine action against open borders and against, like people who don't break immigration laws. So since he's taken genuine action against that, I think acting like his policies are stupid and his supporters are, like, and by extension, his supporters are stupid for falling for it, once again, is a bad move. Like, stop attacking Trump supporters. You're just going to make them come out harder for 2020. Don't act like they're stupid, because they're half the country, and they're going to be half of your constituents if you're president.
And a better way of dealing with that situation, if you're trying to actually do any kind of change, is to try to convince the people otherwise. But that's never what it is. It's just kind of like a blame game. Oh, they're the problem. This is silly.
Calling them the problem is never going to bring them to your side.
Yeah.
And that means insisting not only on shoring up our relationships, but defining a strategy to keep the American people safe from fundamentally new challenges.
Mr. Vice President, I'll let you respond to his argument on judgment.
I made a mistake. I said it 14 years ago. I trusted George Bush to keep his word. He said he was not going to go into Iraq. He said he was only using this to unite the United Nations, to insist we get inspectors in to see what Saddam was doing. When we got elected, the president turned to me with the entire security apparatus and said, Joe, I want you to organize getting 156,000 troops out of Iraq. I did that. I did that. The other thing I want to point out to you is that NATO is, in fact, going to crumble if we don't beat Trump. NATO is in real trouble. We need NATO for more reasons, just physical security. We need NATO to make sure that we do not allow Russia to continue to have its influence in Eastern Europe in ways that it had before. It wasn't just to stop the Soviet Union from coming into Europe. It was to make sure that we did not have a kleptocracy taking over that part of the world, to unite Europe in our behalf. I know how to deal with them. I know every one of these world leaders by their first names. They call me, I talk to them, and I believe I can get it done.
Mr. Vice President, thank you. Mr. Steyer, I do.
Actually, that might be one of the first good things Joe Biden has ever said in his whole life. I think after 2016, right, you had all these Democrats come out. You had the Women's March like the day after Trump was elected. You've had all these things where people have basically made it seem like if Trump gets elected, the world's going to end. And now we've had Trump for 4 years, and the world hasn't ended yet. And I think that a lot of people who maybe aren't super involved in politics at a point where they're kind of comfortable and they're like, okay, and like not everyone's going to show up because, hey, we've had Trump for 4 years and the world didn't end. And I think what Joe Biden does just kind of goes and like lights a flame under the ass of every Democrat, saying like, no, there are actual consequences to this man staying in office. NATO falling apart, there are real world consequences to that. So that's like actually really good on Joe Biden's behalf to not just say Trump man bad, but to say Trump man bad because of this. So we have to get him out of the office. You have to pick a Democrat. And that's not necessarily good for a Biden campaign, but that's good for Democrats. They need to, all of them need to say more things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to bring you in on this because I noticed in the last 24 hours you have an attack ad running here in New Hampshire with images of Mayor Buttigieg, and you say over those images an untested newcomer. But I wanted to ask you tonight on this readiness to be commander-in-chief. You share the stage with a veteran from Afghanistan, a vice president who was in the Situation Room. What makes you most qualified of all candidates on this stage to be commander-in-chief?
Well, let me say this. I agree with Pete Buttigieg that it's about judgment, not tenure. What we're hearing here is a very long dissertation about exactly how America should be the world's policeman. And what we've actually seen in the Middle East is that Barack Obama used diplomacy to get Iran to give up its nuclear ambitions in return for our releasing economic sanctions along with our partners around the world. So when we're talking about our role in the world and commander-in-chief, we have abandoned a diplomacy, we don't have a strategy, and we don't have allies. And actually, this view of the world, that our response should be military, is driven by our gigantic military complex and ignores the biggest problem that we face internationally in the world, which is climate change, and that cannot be solved with guns and tanks and planes. That can only be solved with diplomacy and allies and interaction with other countries. So in fact, what we are listening to right here is a discussion of 20 years of failed military action and how we should continue it and how we should continue spending $700 billion a year on defense when we spend $70 billion a year at the federal level on education. So let's talk about judgment here.
I did not.
We have
I
a
did
long
not say
history
we're going to keep military forces there. That's
Mr.
not
Vice
what I
President, I'll
said.
give you 30 seconds to respond.
That's not what I said. I was part of the reason putting that deal together with Iran. I was there. I was involved in that. I was also part of the deal putting together the Paris Climate Accord. I brought in the Chinese. I was part of that. I was part of every major initiative we've had relative to diplomacy. I have not argued for the placement of major numbers of U.S. combat troops. I have said, along with the President of the United States, Barack Obama, as his partner, I have said we have to strengthen NATO to make it clear that we keep our commitments when we make them. Like we don't keep our commitments to the Kurds. We must keep our commitments when we make them. Otherwise, we have no power whatsoever. And it's not about making sure we're policemen of the world. The only way not to become the policemen of the world is to have allies who will join us in dealing with failed states and terrorism. And that has to be done jointly by a whole lot of people, and it doesn't require a large number of U.S. troops, and I've never said that.
Okay, can I respond
Senator
to that,
Sanders,
David?
Senator Sanders,
Can I respond to that?
Just say this, if I might. Like Joe and others, I also heard the arguments in terms of the war in Iraq from Bush, from Cheney, from John Bolton, from the whole administration. I listened very carefully, and I concluded that they were lying through their teeth. And I not only voted against that war, but I helped lead the opposition. And it saddens me so much, if you hear what I said, it's on YouTube, my fears about all the destabilization that would take place by the U.S. invading Iraq. It's sad to me that is what happened. But let me just pick up on a point that Tom made, which is absolutely right. Trump wants to build a wall around America. Problem is, if we are going to deal with issues like climate change, not only do we in America have to take on the greed of the fossil fuel industry, we have to lead the entire world. This is not an American issue. It's a global issue. We got to bring China and Russia and Brazil and Pakistan and India and every major country on earth into the fight against climate change. And here is my dream. Maybe it's a radical dream, but maybe, just maybe, given the crisis of climate change, the world can understand that instead of spending $1.8 trillion a year collectively on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool our resources and fight our common enemy, which is climate change.
So, David,
Senator Sanders, thank you. George, back to you.
We have much more debate coming up, but we have got to take a break. We'll be right back.